So Sri, in your book and from your research, a very shocking statistic comes up that only 7% of leaders or companies really succeed in their digital transformation journey, which means shockingly that 93% of leaders and companies don't succeed. So why is that, and what do these companies who get it right, these leaders who get it right, do differently?
Yeah, so maybe that 7% has now accelerated to something like 15, 16% because COVID was a big eye-opener for everybody. And we see our clients and data tells us that the pace of investment has accelerated. When we looked at the responses from these 5,000 plus companies and we started tabulating what makes companies successful and what makes them, some of them extraordinarily successful and some of them, mediocre sort of results and some of them abject sort of failures. There are 5 factors that sort of came up in front of us. One is the transformation of the value proposition of the company, as I said, right, which is rethinking what products and services you're delivering, and then transforming the value chain of the company, right, so that the entire engagement with the customer from the time they buy to the time they upgrade or replace is a very, very experience-driven approach, and embedded in that is the use of technology. And then the last piece is the transformation of the organization. In the book, I say technology does not enable transformations, people do, right? Leaders cannot transform big organizations by themselves. They have to help their people get the change. They have to empower those people and train them and develop them. And once the employees are vested in it, right, then they take over and it becomes a mass movement as opposed to a top-down mandate, right? Now, these are some factors, but above all is a factor called the digital IQ of the collective leadership of the company, right? Now, when the leaders in a CEO's team get the overall concept of change in their industry and how their company has to adapt based on how customers have changed, and they move in harmony with each other, then all the other 4 factors that I talked about start falling in line, right? They collectively think about the value prop. They collectively think about the end-to-end experience from the time a customer does research, that is marketing, to how a product is developed, R&D, how it is sold, sales, how it is serviced, service department, and so on and so forth. And that, the digital IQ of the leadership of the company, therefore, sets the tone for the other 4 or 5 factors.
I also wanted to talk here about your own personal journey, right? I referred to it in the introduction. You were with the elite special forces of the Indian Army. You've been a soldier. You came up from the NDA, etc. Now that itself is very unique because very, very few soldiers get to the elite forces. Everybody wants to get there, but that's get to the special forces. Now, you've gone on from there to leading a Silicon Valley company, a digital transformation company that services clients across the world. You have patents to your name too. So where do you see your own leadership journey in all of this, and how did this inform you as you wrote the book and what you're speaking to us about?
I think there are a couple of dimensions to it. One is that the foundation of a particular leadership style is laid very early for everybody, right? For me, that style and the values and the model largely came from the institutions that I went to. You mentioned them, right? The National Defense Academy, IMA in Dehradun, and the regiments that I served in. And what they teach you is to be able to look at situations and problems very uniquely, right? And not be wedded to a particular point of view, right? And then once you evaluate a particular situation, you address that on its own merits, right? And the choices that you make, therefore, fall out of that, right? And then after that comes the ability to organize teams, the ability to drive change, to motivate people, and to do it in very uncertain terms that we are going through. These are all foundational elements that I learned in the very first part of my career, and I'm extremely grateful for that. But then the other aspect, which is the business experience and the perspectives and the point of view, that comes from experience of having worked with clients and having led transformations and so on. The parallel here is that when you are on the fault line and when the fundamentals are changing, and you understand what that change is about, then leaders have to muster, a great amount of courage to let go of their habits and their comforts and their preconceived notions, and then reinvent themselves. And they have to reinvent themselves first. You cannot order a transformation. If I have 10 people reporting to me in the organization, I have to demonstrate that I understand these transformations better than they do, and only then they're going to sort of follow. So the foundation was laid in the first part of my career, and then it's the experience, but both of them somehow came together. And this is the dilemma of every leader today. First, to understand the problem. When I do, think about the way forward. And number 3 is to stare at the reality of changing oneself and the organization, and then persist until you get the results.
So Shri, in your book, you talk about a new leadership persona called a methodical innovator. And in a way, I found this very fascinating because what this does is this democratizes digital IQ. And that's an area that many, many leaders struggle with. So how can leaders really go about building this?
Great question. So again, when we dove deeper into the data around leadership, right, we tried to develop a stereotype of what these successful leaders are, right? And in management theory and leadership behavior, there are different types of personas, right? There are democratic leaders who build consensus. There are bureaucratic leaders who operate through procedures and policies. There are dictatorial leaders, history is replete with them, who are top-down in everything that they want to do and very merciless about it. Then there are your very transformational sort of leaders, great evangelists, great public speakers, etc. But when we looked at the data, the persona that we were seeing would not match any of these. We have a preconceived notion of what a great leader should be, right? Amazing presence, great speaker, motivator, and should have an MBA and should have done this and should have done that, etc. And this data was telling us a different story. So the methodical innovator essentially is a persona that applies method and not necessarily personality or force to transform the organization. And what that means is that these leaders have a certain process that they follow. They are not your big on-stage personalities. They're very careful thinkers. Oftentimes they're introverts, right? So they study this transformation challenge. They use data to validate what is really happening or where they should go. They prioritize very dispassionately. For example, if I'm a CEO who has come from a sales and marketing background, I will be predisposed and I'll be thinking that as long as we are good on the customer-facing front, right, then we're going to be successful. But what is the use of a sales and marketing transformation when the product the company is churning out is rotary phones that no longer are bought by anyone, right? So when that reality is in front of them because of data, they tend to be very cold and very dispassionate and prioritize correctly, right? They are very patient, aggressive and patient, and they lead from the front, and they invest very, very heavily in their talent. And they keep repeating the process until the results start becoming more and more predictable. Oftentimes, the first 2 rounds of transformations don't deliver those results. So when you think about this particular construct, it gives you a very different set of skills and experiences and persona. That's why we call it a very method-driven or a methodical innovator persona.
Yeah, that's really a fascinating persona, And I also really thought about that because you're so right when you say that, companies, they want rock star CEOs,
Correct.
but really that's really not what is required in the digital age.
Yeah, so you're right. Companies expect rock stars. But you see, the methodical innovator is not a born persona. all others are, right? Great transformational leaders, great visionaries have certain inborn qualities that they grow up with, right? Whereas the methodical innovator persona is an acquired persona, right? It comes with practice. It comes with putting a structure to all of this, which I describe in the book. And it's an acquired taste, right? And so going back to your point on democratizing digital IQ, what it really means is that every leader has an opportunity to become a methodical innovator, and by following a certain process. So one doesn't have to be, a rock star to become a methodical innovator.
That's fascinating.